Hello, scholars. Welcome to our next history lesson. We're going to again today get warmed up with some opening questions just to get us all thinking about our history work. So, number one, name one thing that went wrong in Britain's plan to defeat the Continental Army in Albany. It ends up becoming the Battle of Saratoga. Now, there's a couple of different things you could say for this, right? There was more than one thing that went wrong. Perhaps you mentioned or thought of General Howe, right? Who was supposed to leave New York City and head north to Albany to help surround General Gates's Continental Army, but he did not do that. He had a different plan, which actually relates to our next question. Another thing you could have said that went wrong is General St. Ledger, who was in the Great Lakes, was supposed to be heading east toward Albany to help surround General Gates's Continental Army. But his army meets up with some patriots, they fight, and General St. Ledger's army does not actually make it to Albany. So, what ends up happening there when those things go wrong is the one remaining British army under General Burgoyne does in fact meet up with General Gates's army in Saratoga. Hence, hence it becoming known as the Battle of Saratoga. So the two things that you could have said went wrong: General Howe not following the plan, and General St. Ledger ending up fighting Patriots and not making it. Number two, speaking of General Howe, what city did General Howe capture? Right? Remember, he decided to swing to this particular city, capture it, and then go to Albany, but he did not actually have time to do both. So he did not make it to Albany, but he did capture the city of, did you remember it? Philadelphia. Correct. Number three, name one country that became an ally to the American side. Now, historians, you had three options here. You could have said Spain, you could have said the Netherlands, or a third country you might have been thinking secretly helping the American side as an ally, France. And then number four, a reach back kind of question. Who finished the ride started by Paul Revere and Billy Dawes? Hmm. If you remembered his name was Dr. Samuel Prescott, you got that question right. Well done. Now, today, scholars, our lesson isn't quite as great of news as a follow up to this victory in Saratoga. We are going to learn about a famous sketch created by Benjamin Franklin, and we're actually going to today hear about the hardest time of the war for George Washington and his troops. That seems like kind of a downer after this great victory in our last lesson. Remember, that victory was for General Gates and his battalion or his group of troops. This is about George Washington and his soldiers, like his battalion of the army, and a hardship they have. Let's get started. So, first, that sketch by Benjamin Franklin. Here's a look at that sketch. You've maybe seen it before. It's entitled Join or Die by Benjamin Franklin. And the title of it doesn't mean, right, that he's going to kill you if you don't join him, but it has a greater meaning. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, but I first want you to notice a few things. Notice the snake is in pieces. And you're probably noticing right toward the tail of the snake, the SC for South Carolina. Then next to that, NC for North Carolina. We have the V for Virginia, the M for Maryland. Right? The P, it kind of looks like an R, but it's a P with kind of a little smudge for Pennsylvania, then New Jersey, New York, and then the head of the snake, that bigger part at the front, is New England, right? Those New England colonies like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. So it's important to note that he has all these colonies here and the title Join or Die. Let me explain the meaning of his sketch. So, Benjamin Franklin created this sketch as a political cartoon, but it became an important message for the idea of the colonies uniting together. In his sketch, in his political cartoon, he was basically saying, like the snake will die if its pieces are not joined, right? If you cut a snake into all those pieces, it will die, right? He's saying by die, he means fail if we do not join or unite together to fight. So in his title, Join or Die, join meaning means unite together, work together, right? Working as one. Or die, meaning fail in our fight for independence. It really reminds me of our saying in Concordia, where is Cite sunt? In union lies strength, meaning, right, we're stronger together. His political cartoon is saying, right, they're stronger together, right? This snake is stronger living if it's all connected into one, joined together. So keep that in mind as we look at it again one more time, right? So his political cartoon saying these pieces need to all join together, unite together to succeed. What are they trying to succeed at, scholars? Fighting and winning independence from Great Britain. In order to do that, he's saying we have to work together, right? Just like us scholars having to work together to succeed at our learning. That's also what's happening with his political cartoon. So, important for you to remember who created this sketch, Benjamin Franklin, and the meaning behind join or die, what he means by those words, right? Joining, uniting together, or die, meaning fail at this attempt to break away from a mother country. And now, scholars, a look at that part I was saying about George Washington and his men. A hard time for them. And it's interesting because this hardship isn't a battle. It's the winter they spent in Valley Forge, a camp they set up and named Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. So the winter of 1777 carried out from December into January and February of 1778. So it's one winter, but the year changes during that winter. After twice trying to win back the city of Philadelphia, remember, we just reviewed General Howe capturing that city? Well, the Continental Army has now twice tried to win back Philadelphia. They have failed, but they want to stay near Philadelphia. So, there, nearby in Pennsylvania, by Philadelphia, they build a camp. The camp, the Continental Army camps out there just outside Philadelphia, naming their camp Valley Forge. Now, it's a terrible winter that winter. He and his troops have very few blankets. They have very little food. They have no boots other than the boots they were wearing, and their boots have worn thin. Their huts that they built were smoky and cold. Many soldiers were sick. Things were not looking good. Scholars, before I flip to the next slide, look at that list again. What are some reasons that this is not going well? Study those. Now, very quickly, the huts that they built, smoky and cold. It was very interesting. They first built these little huts, right, to sleep in, to give them shelter, and they built fires in them, but then found that they filled with smoke, and that wasn't really working very well. So the smokiness was hurting their lungs. And when they built the fire outside of it, then they were cold inside their huts. So they were having trouble kind of figuring out how to stay warm, but also stay safe. They had very few blankets, very little food. So as soon as you're cold and not eating well, something called fatigue sets in, where your body is very weary and tired, or you're not getting the right nutrients. You're not getting warmth to recover, which then prevents you from getting good sleep. All of that leads to this weariness called fatigue. By the time that winter ends, scholars, 2,500 of General Washington's soldiers had died, either of disease or of exposure to the cold weather, which we call frostbite. So, diseases, illness killed some of them, and simply freezing to death. Frostbite, exposure killed some of them. And in addition to that, another 500 soldiers simply ran away. They deserted. Do you know what that means when you desert? It doesn't mean you ate dessert, it means you skipped out on what you were supposed to be doing. They deserted, they ran away and went back home. Now, at the start of that winter, when they first built Valley Forge Camp, Washington had 7,000 soldiers with him. By the end of that winter in Valley Forge, there were only 4,000 of them left. So, scholars, that's 3,000 soldiers that either died or simply ran away. Not a single battle happened in that time, but he lost almost half of his soldiers just to death or desertion. Not a good time for his winter in Valley Forge. It was indeed a rough time for Washington and his troops. They struggled to survive the hardship of that horrible winter. By spring, things were actually looking more hopeful, even though they had 3,000 less soldiers in their army. By that spring, some people had stepped up to help. Two of those people are Marquis de Lafayette and Baron Frederick von Steuben. Now, Lafayette, from France, offered his help now that France was an ally to the Americans, and he ends up becoming one of George Washington's most trusted aides in future battles. Lafayette also goes on to help France in their fight for independence. Baron Frederick von Steuben from Germany also stepped in during that winter of Valley Forge, helping bring some hopefulness in the spring. Now, von Steuben knew a lot about soldiering, so he spent that spring, the end of the winter, drilling the soldiers over and over on marching and firing, right? How to be, right, training them. So by the spring, General George Washington, thanks to von Steuben and Lafayette, had a well trained army for the first time. Two additional people who helped: Thaddeus Kosciuszko from Poland, who later went to help fight for liberty in Poland, and also from Poland, Casimir Pulaski. He ended up being wounded in battle and died, but these two also stepped in, offering to help train and plan for future battles during that harsh, horrible winter in Valley Forge. Scholars, that brings us to the end of today's lesson, and I want you to think for a moment. We learned about a famous sketch created by Benjamin Franklin. Do you remember key things about that sketch? We also learned about the hardest time of the war for George Washington and his troops, that winter at Valley Forge. Do you remember some of the things that made that winter so hard? If not, you should go back and listen to that information again. That's going to be important when we test later in our study. All right, scholars, your task now is to open the attached Google form, answer the 5 questions about today's lesson, and click submit at the bottom of that form. Make sure you've sent those answers to your teacher for grading. Thanks for joining me. And scholars, we have only a couple chapters left, a couple key final battles as this war comes to an end. Be sure to join me next time